Now, the government unveiled a new COVID alert system back in May, a 1 to 5 system, which shows the current level of the coronavirus threat and the action that should be taken as a result. What level are we currently on?
We're transitioning from level 4 to level 3. We've made steady progress to get the R level down below 1. It's still below 1. It's between 0.7 and 1. So it's below 1, 0.7 and 0.9. If you look at the data, if you want to really see what the trend is showing us, if you compare last Friday's data with the previous Friday, so over a week, we've got over 800 fewer new cases over that period. We've got over 200 fewer people in critical care with coronavirus. I think the deaths are down over that period by 27. That is the steady progress that we're making, which means as we transition to step 2 on the roadmap to easing restrictions, we can take those steps responsibly, but we just have to be very careful. As Jonathan Van Tam, who you just quoted, has said, we're at a precarious moment. We can ease up, we can protect life, but also livelihoods, get life back to something resembling normal, but we must monitor it very carefully, and if there's any uptick in the number of cases, if we stop making the progress I described, we're going to have to take further measures again and target the virus wherever it may appear. So we're making progress. Obviously, this is a sensitive moment, but we can't just stay in lockdown forever. We've got to transition, and the more we transition through careful steps, the more I think we'll build up confidence in the approach we're taking.
Very briefly at the beginning of the answer, you said that we were transitioning from level 4 to level 3, so I'll take that as confirmation that we haven't yet reached level 3, because according to the government's alert system, when you're at level 4, the current level, the action that should be taken is the current social distancing measures and restrictions. But you aren't maintaining the current restrictions, are you? From Monday, you're beginning a gradual relaxing of the restrictions and social distancing measures. That's the action pegged at level 3. So why aren't you following your own advice on this?
Well, as I said, we're transitioning from 4 to 3, and
But you haven't reached level 3.
That alert system is obviously decided independently by the scientists. We have at every step along the way followed the advice, not just of the Deputy Chief Medical Officer that you cited, but Sir Patrick Vallance. I spoke to Sir Patrick over the weekend, the Chief Scientific Advisor, and the package of measures we're taking is based on the advice that we get from SAGE. Obviously, we as the elected politicians, we take the decisions, but at every step along the way, we've taken that advice. And the reason that we can take the steps that we're taking tomorrow to start getting more primary school children back to school, to start taking the measures to open up the economy on car showrooms, outdoor markets, is precisely because not just the R level is down below 1, the way I described, but also because we're making the progress on the data as I described. And all of that is very carefully scrutinised, and we rely very carefully on the advice from the scientists.
You see, it's hard to escape the view that you thought it would be at level 3 now. It's not. So you've decided to plough on anyway?
No, we said that we were transitioning. We set out a roadmap. We've set very clear conditions for moving, first of all, step 1, which we took earlier in May, then to step 2, which we plan to take and we will take tomorrow. And then there are further steps along the way. But we've always said we'll follow the scientific advice. There are strict conditions that we need to see fulfilled. They have been fulfilled. The R level is still below 1. The death rate, if you look at the trend data, is coming down. We've got the testing and tracing system. We've got 25,000 tracers that have been recruited. We've started already the testing and tracing. We've got the capacity to make sure that 10,000 new cases on a daily basis, that we can trace the people that have been in close contact with all of those cases. So we're making all of that progress that we described, and that's the basis on which we can proceed to step 2 tomorrow.
You say that you're following the science. I mean, that's really been the mantra of the government all along. But let's be honest, let's, treat people like adults. Scientists disagree. The scientific advice isn't definitive. I mean, we've seen that in the last few days when members of the government's own SAGE advisory committee have come out saying that they disagree with the easing of the lockdown measures. Why don't you just be honest and say that, look, this is a political decision. You're weighing up things like the economy versus suppressing the virus, and actually it's you, the politicians, who need to take responsibility for this, not the scientists.
Well, certainly we want to be based on the scientific evidence. You're right to say that the scientists won't always agree. That is actually the essence of the SAGE group. There are at any one time 25 scientists that are participating. There's a whole range of other subgroups and other expert advice that they get. And it would, frankly, with the new pandemic, it would be totally surprising if they all agreed in uniform unanimity. They don't. That's why we have that group, to test the evidence, to test the scientists' views based on that evidence. And then you're absolutely right, we as elected politicians have to take the final judgment call. That's inherent in this process, as it is with all pandemics and all countries around the world. And then just finally, on your point about whether it was some kind of trade-off between the economy and public health, that's not the way we view it. Our overriding priority is to protect life, but we also know that we've got to protect livelihoods, jobs, the economy, because that props up all of our crucial public services. And so the steps that we're taking, it's not some binary trade-off, because of course if we had a second peak in the virus, we would end up back in lockdown, and that would be bad for public health reasons, but also for the economy. We'd have more protracted economic pain. So we're taking measures now which are based on both the public health considerations, but they're also crucial for the economy, and we're taking sure-footed steps, and we can take the second step tomorrow because of the progress we've made. But it's true to say the scientists do not always agree. In fact, that's not what we want. We don't want them all to agree. We want them to test the evidence. That's the way we get better advice from them. And yes, absolutely, as elected politicians, we've got to take the judgment calls and be responsible for those.
One of the concerns that some of those scientists have raised in recent days is that the test and trace system is effectively untested. It's only just got up and running. Professor John Edmonds saying that relaxing the lockdown with an untested track and trace system, I think we're taking some risk here. Sir Jeremy Farrar said test, trace and isolate has to be in place, fully working, capable of dealing with any surge immediately. Now, there are 8,000 new COVID-19 cases every day in England, according to the Office of National Statistics. That's the 5th highest in the world. That's not counting those in hospitals or care homes. At what level of daily coronavirus infections do you think the test and trace system can actually deal with?
Well, the international experience, and we've obviously had previous pandemics, and some of those countries that are ahead, if you like, in the way you described on the test and trace system, had previous pandemics, so they had that learning that they'd done. But the experience, both from those pandemics and from around the world, is that actually the majority of testing and trace systems work most effectively when you're, and can deal with the strain for the volume of cases that you just described, once you're coming through the peak and once you've got the virus down below a certain level, which is why we've at pace been building up our test and tracing capacity. We've got the 25,000 tracers recruited. That work has already begun. They have the capacity to check the contacts of 10,000 cases each day, and we're also getting piloting the app. We've got the pilot on the Isle of Wight. All of these things are in place. So we will strengthen it and reinforce it as we go, but the system is already up and running, and that is part of the reason and the calculation as to why we can proceed to step 2 on Monday.
You can see why people are nervous, though, ahead of the Monday when that step 2 will be released. You know, we've got 8,000 new infections a day. That's a high level of infection still. An R rate of between 0.7 and 0.9, just a little under 1. An untested contact tracing system that's only just been set up. An app that is still in pilot. Are we heading for another resurgence?
No, and as I described and I set out at the start of this interview, the number of new cases Friday compared to the previous Friday is down by over 800. The number of people in critical care with COVID-19 is down by over 200. The death rate, if you take the trend data, is coming down. And it's because of that progress that we can take the steps that we're taking tomorrow. But you're right that people should be cautious. And one of the things that the scientists have said to us is that we can take these measures, but people must still adhere to the revised social distancing rules and the guidance that we put out. So yes, we are cautiously proceeding, and yes, people do need to follow the guidance, but we are confident that this is the right step to be taken at this moment in time. And of course, because we've got the test and tracing system up and running in effect, where we see any uptick, outbreaks, we can target our approach very carefully, and that's the whole point of the test and tracing system, so that we've got control of this virus and we can continue the pressure to keep it coming down as we take those cautious, sure-footed steps forward, both on schools, on the economy, and also, you know, you look at the people that have been shielding, over 2 million people that have been shielded, elderly people with a particular condition. We understand that very responsibly, very carefully, but they will feel the need and want to come out and have some outdoor exposure, to be able to go for a walk outside. So we're taking those steps, and the guidance on that will be set out by the Community Secretary later on today. We're taking those steps very carefully, based on the science, but also based on our ability now to monitor the virus in a way that we hadn't had before. And that's a tribute to the work at DHSC, getting the testing and tracing system up and running, and we're continuing to look at reinforcing that at every step along the way.
So just quickly, before we move on to other issues, will the lockdown be tightened again if you can see infection rates increasing?
We will target, if there's any uptick, and it could be in a locality, could be in a particular setting, we will target very carefully measures that would apply to it, so that we can take these steps but also keep control of the virus. And that's certainly the capacity that we now have, and with test and tracing and all of the other knowledge and learning that we've done, that's the ability that we've got now, and that's why we can take this step in a confident and responsible way.
OK, thank you. On Dominic Cummings, when did you first find out that Dominic Cummings had left London and travelled to Durham?
I'm not sure, but to be honest with you, when the story broke was when I first became aware of the detail of it.
The reason I'm asking you is because the Prime Minister was obviously ill at the time that Dominic Cummings made the journey. Boris Johnson testing positive for coronavirus on the 27th of March. It was on around the 30th of March that we believe that Dominic Cummings was in Durham. And from the 5th of April, you deputised for the Prime Minister when he was ill. That's before the trip to Barnard Castle that Dominic Cummings made. So while you were the de facto Prime Minister, did you know that Dominic Cummings was in Durham?
I just knew he was out of action because he'd come down with coronavirus. And to be honest with you, Sophie, I'm sure you'll understand, given the scenario we were in, with the Prime Minister taken ill and very seriously ill as it later emerged, I was just focused with the government, with a great cabinet team, on making sure we continue to focus relentlessly on dealing with the virus. So that wasn't something, I mean, I knew Dom was unwell and he was out of action, and obviously I wanted him and the Prime Minister to get well soon, but I wasn't focused on his movements at all, and I wasn't aware of them.
Just to try and get the straightforward facts of what happened, because of course you were acting Prime Minister at the time, so I do think it is quite important. Was the first time you knew that he went to Durham when you read it in the media then?
I wouldn't be able to say with any precision. I want to give you a really accurate, reliable answer, but I hadn't, at the time, I wasn't aware of it, other than, as I said, to know that he was unwell, he was out of action, and to be honest with you, I didn't inquire as to his own personal circumstances. I was just getting on with the job.
So you didn't know, frankly? You didn't know, did you?
No, not at the time, no.
OK, thank you. There's a couple of other foreign affairs stories I'm keen to get you on while we have you, Foreign Secretary. We have seen the protests in the US over the death of George Floyd. We've all seen, of course, the pretty horrific video with a police officer standing on his neck. Now, Donald Trump said that if those protesters had breached the White House, they would have been greeted with the most vicious dogs and the most ominous weapons I've ever seen. Earlier this week, he tweeted, "When the looting starts, the shooting starts." Is it acceptable for the leader of a country to be talking in those terms about his own citizens?
Well, Sophie, I'm not going to start commenting on the commentary or indeed the press statements that other world leaders make, or indeed the US president. What I would say is that obviously, as you said, that footage of what happened to George Floyd was very distressing, as has been the scenes across America of the rioting and some of the violence. And what we do know is that the lead suspect has now been charged with murder. There is a federal review, and we want to see a de-escalation of all of those tensions in America come together.
Sometimes, though, you do need to comment on the statements made by other leaders, though, don't you?
We will comment on actions and stuff that is material to the relationship we have, but I'm not going to be drawn into the questions of whether the US President's remarks were the right thing to do. I leave them to comment on their own domestic policies.
Why not?
Well, I think all it does is create a distraction from all the things that we're doing. We're working very closely with the US on coronavirus, on many other things, and frankly it becomes a media distraction, and I want to be focused on the job at hand.
OK, and just finally, Foreign Secretary, Harry Dunn was killed last year after being hit by a car driven by the wife of a US intelligence officer who then claimed diplomatic immunity, 19-year-old Harry Dunn. Now, his family want to bring a private criminal prosecution against you, saying that you didn't have the authority to allow Ansa Koulis to return to the US. So did you and the Foreign Office act properly and lawfully?
So look, first of all, that's a family that's really hurting. My deepest sympathies are with them. We're on the family's side. I want to see justice for Harry Dunn. We cleared the way so that a prosecution charges could be brought, and we've made clear to the Americans, and I've discussed the case recently with my US opposite number, that we remain deeply concerned and dissatisfied with the way the Americans have approached this. We think Ansa Koulis should come back and face justice in this country. Absolutely. In terms of my own the private prosecution story, I'm not going to comment too much on it, other than just to say I'm confident that I've and the Foreign Office and the government have proceeded lawfully and properly throughout this. But you know, we understand that this is a devastating time, an ordeal for the family, and we're just doing everything with it that we can to get justice for them.